Emmerdale had become a place of open wounds. Taped-off hedgerows, neighbors who once shared jam now kept each other at arm's length, and gossip that tasted like ash. The old radio in the woolpack kept coughing out the same headline, Celia Daniels dead, and then impossibly Celia Daniels back on screen. It was the kind of twist that made people check the corners of their rooms, as if the village's truths might be hiding under the furniture. No one thought she'd come back. We all saw the knife go in. The shove, the sudden bright look in Ray Walters's face, the fall. Ray, whose face had been carved by violence for years. Celia, the cold matriarch who ran more than one business that never showed up in any accounts. If the camera had been a jury, it would have convicted him out loud. But Emmerdale's new week of special episodes promised something else. Rewind the night, play it through 5 different pairs of eyes, and let the village watch the same bloodied road from different angles. Each day would focus on a suspect, Laurel, Rona, Marlin, and then the night itself. And threaded through all of them, like a seam that had been pulled too tight, was the impossible headline. Celia is coming back. Episode 1, Laurel. Laurel Thomas had always kept her heart in a fragile glass jar. So when Ray Walters offered her shine, tickets to the life he claimed he could give her, a bracelet that glittered like a promise, she let herself believe. His gifts had weight and smell, and a kind of danger that made her pulse quicken. Then the confession arrived like a storm through the kitchen window. Ray's world was not a playground of fast cars and easy money. It was trafficking, debt, and a ledger written in fear. The flashback opened on Laurel's face as it had been the night she slammed that front door. Charlotte Bellamy's eyes were a slow, choked apology to herself. She remembered the bracelet, expensive, too expensive, lying cold in the palm of her hand, and the way guilt sat on her shoulders like a heavy coat. In the special episode, the camera lingered on that bracelet. The bracelet that had been found clutched in a shock of hair at the murder scene. The village saw Laurel fiddling with it, saw her tears when she first learned the truth. But flashbacks have corners. As she left Ray's caravan that night, door slamming, a final "it's over" spat like a thrown cigarette, Laurel walked past someone leaning against a white van. A silhouette, cigarette glowing. She had sworn she'd been alone. On screen, Laurel's version of events revealed doubt. She had wanted him out of her life, but did she want him dead? The audience watched a woman shred her own alibi with the length of a look. Episode 2, Rona. Rona Goskirk was a furnace barely caged. Her public kindness hid a temper honed on betrayal and fear. When Ray's shadow fell over April, when the teenager was dragged into courier runs and threats at knife point, Rona's fury took on the shape of a strategy. She and Marlin paid, argued, begged. £2,000 a week, she spat into the camera during one memory, her mouth set like iron. The money was never the point. The point was to break Ray's hold. This episode was cold and relentless. Zoe Henry's Rona did not kill on screen, but navigated the kind of moral quicksand that leaves you mudslick and reckless. She admitted, in curt, private confessions to herself and to her husband, that she would break the law to protect a child. She had set a trap before. She could again. When the flashback played her steps that night, the camera put her in the lane behind Ray's caravan, a figure in a raincoat with a phone clenched in her pale hand. She had gone there to bargain, to beg. The shot ended with her turning away, shoulders shaking, and the audience felt the centrifugal pull of something unresolved. Episode 3, Marlin. Marlin's story was a bruise. The Dingle family bear, kindly in the nursery and fierce at the gate, had been pushed to a cliff. He'd found April's terror written on the back of her hands and in her emptied eyes. When Marlin confronted Ray on the lane that afternoon, he found a man who smelled of other people's despair, who laughed at threats like they were lullabies. Marlin saw red. The world narrowed to the size of a fist and a name, April. In his flashback, Mark Charnock's Marlin was human to the marrow. He lunged. Ray hit back. They scuffled. The camera showed Marlin in the mud, the cold of the night on his cheek, Ray's boots sliding over the turf. When Ray shouted his warning, "Little girl is gone, Dingle, or you're a dead man," the village watched Marlin's hands shake. To him, the murder scene had been a phantom he wanted to blame on himself. He left, panting, thinking perhaps he had killed a man. The episode ended with Marlin staring at his reflection in a cracked window, an accusing stranger. Episode 4, The Night. Thursday's episode promised to stitch everything together. It began from a height, a drone's eye over cobbles slick with rain, silence before the scream. Then the cut, the night we think we know. Celia's living room, Ray's dark silhouette, the sudden flash of steel. We saw the horror from across the room, Ray's hands on Celia's chest, the small, ugly sound she made when the knife found flesh, his face when he realized the deed was done. But the camera didn't stop there. It followed Ray into the aftermath, the frantic, fumbling human moments you don't usually get in news headlines. He grabbed a red sports bag, the one that would become notorious, and padded up the stairs. He went to Bear Wolf's room. The boy, wide-eyed Joshua Richards' Bear, was a figure of confusion and fear. Ray tried to make some sort of penance, some last ugly apology for the life he'd hijacked. He told Bear what to do, how to bury the truth, how to make the hurt quiet. The montage that followed was an atomized reconstruction. Laurel's slammed door, Rona's turning back in the lane, Marlin's retreat, and Ray in Bear's room, hands shaking. Then the night split. The versions of events diverged like tributaries, and the audience saw that no single memory was whole. Final episode, the return. And then Emmerdale did something television rarely does without turning the world on its head. It brought Celia back into the room. Not as a resurrected corpse, but as a performance, a presence staged, a comeback filmed in studio hush with Jay Griffith's expression running like polished ice. The return was less a miracle and more a masterclass in control. Celia emerged on screen like a sealed vault opening. Sharp suits, sharper words, an interview in the village hall where the villagers had been invited to watch. She was alive. She had been in hiding, she said. She had been injured, she said. There were explanations for everything, and recordings. She claimed she had wanted Ray out of her life, so much she had let him have the satisfaction of thinking he had killed her. Her comeback served two purposes. First, it lit the match beneath every other confession and suspicion, making people fidget and take sides. Second, it did what Celia always did. She reframed the story to her benefit. She released a voice note that was supposed to be Ray's last confession, a recording of him admitting to certain crimes, certain threats, and the microphone in the hall trembled with the heat of revelation. If Celia was alive, then perhaps Ray's conscience had gone to host on that red sports bag, not in the district nurse's ledger. But the best soap twist is the one that does not shout. It whispers. During the press-like chaos of Celia's staged return, a small scene unfolded in the corner of the village hall that no camera initially sought. Bear Wolf, who had been invisible in most hearts and all but the village social services, slid out of the back. The police had models of the red sports bag on display. Everyone had been instructed to watch. Bear had not slept in weeks. He had listened to Ray's commands the way a shadow listens to the wind. An officer called his name, a gentle, practiced voice, and Bear walked to the front as if to confess to a school punishment. He spoke in fragments, the way Ray had laughed, how he had asked Bear to hide things, how he had told Bear that men like them had no future. He told the court of the hall in low words that night in Ray's caravan, after the stabbing, Ray had crouched in Bear's room and begged. Bear had panicked. He had reached for the lamp beside the bed, swung, and Ray's head had met it. The lamp had shattered and blood looked like a sudden, obscene sunrise. The village gasped because that is what villages do, a noise like rain breaking on glass. For all the adult fury and adult motive, the act that killed Ray, the final, decisive blow, had a child's hands on it. Bear had not planned. He had not schemed. He had acted in terror, in defense of a self that had been carved up by predators and offered to the market. If you like your stories neat, this one was not. But the truth had a way of corralling fiction. Celia's expression didn't change when Bear's confession came out. She was a conductor who had always loved discord, a paused violin in her hands. She had come back to set the stage, but she had not planned for every improvisation. She did what she did best, she redirected. She put the spotlight on Ray's cruelty, on the men he had used, insisting that the village look away from Bear's hands and toward the bigger rot. She demanded leniency for the boy, with a voice that promised vengeance if anyone so much as whispered cover-up. In the days that followed, that last montage of the special week, Emmerdale wept in all directions. Laurel sat alone with her bracelet in a packet of tissue at the police station, denying and admitting and wanting a simpler life than the one she had chosen. Rona and Marlin listened to each other's half-truths and crafted apologies like fragile boats. Bear was taken into care and then, in a move the village would debate until the end of time, given a guarded chance at rehabilitation. Celia, for all her comeback, remained a storm. She had returned alive and more dangerous because she had returned with narrative in her pocket. The final scene felt less like a revelation than a settling of dust. In the police archive, among photographs and statements, sat the red sports bag, its zip frayed, its interior a map of a life. Inside it was not only the physical residue of Ray's last hours, but also the proof that guilt is rarely a simple thing to point at. The murderer, the person who had swung out of desperation and fear, was a child who had been forced, broken, and finally made to act. The adults, Laurel, Rona, Marlin, had been actors in a play they didn't remember auditioning for. Celia had pulled strings as ever. She had used silence as a tool and returned to reap the sound. On the last night of that week, the camera found Celia one final time, older perhaps in a way that life had no right to make her, sitting outside the Woolpack with a cup of something she pretended to sip while everyone watched. Jay Griffiths let Celia's eyes speak, not quite remorse, not quite triumph. She mouthed something like an apology to no one and everyone. The village felt the chill of a story that had been rearranged without permission. People left the Woolpack in two kinds of small conversations. One was about justice, whether it had been served and in what shapes. The other was about mercy, whether a harmed child could ever be held as guilty in a world where adults had taught him to fear, lied to him, and used him. What the week had done, more than answer who had killed Ray, was show that truth in Emmerdale was like the farmhouses clustered on the hills. It had many rooms, some with light and some forever in shadow. Each perspective had been necessary. Laurel's slamming door explained motive, but not means. Rona's bitterness explained why someone might act for a child. Marlin's fury explained how a kind man might become a suspect. Bear's frightened hands ended the argument with a tragic, accidental precision. Celia's return kept the story alive, and like any great soap return, it left the village with more questions than it had before the week began. Villagers debated in doorways, in the school run, at the salon counter. Jay Griffiths' performance was a masterclass in refrigeration. She chilled the room just by being there. In the end, Emmerdale did not offer tidy justice. It offered a mirror. When you look into it, the person staring back is likely someone you know. The murderer was not who most of the village wanted him to be. The villainy was not confined to one person. And Celia, who had come back to take control of the story, had perhaps for the first time miscalculated, because you cannot always edit a life down to a neat broadcast. The week closed with one lingering shot. A red sports bag zipped shut on a shelf in the police store, a bracelet in a plastic evidence bag, a child looking out of a window at a valley that would not forget him, and Celia walking away under a sky that refused to yield its light. The village breathed again, but differently. The people who watched the special episodes would not look at their neighbors the same way. They had seen how one wound echoed into another, and how sometimes the last punch in a fight is thrown not by a monster, but by someone who has simply been made small enough to strike back. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Emmerdale Echoes.